Hi, everyone. Doug Laney here. As co-chair of the 16th Annual MIT Chief Data Officer Symposium and Innovation Fellow with West Monroe, a premier sponsor of the event, I'd like to invite you to connect with my colleagues and me there. This year's hybrid event offers sessions for everyone from technical concepts like blockchain, data science, and data ops to more strategic topics like alternative data, data monetization, the emerging role of the Chief Data Officer, and even the data implications of ESG. I hope to see you in Cambridge this July.
Welcome, everyone. I'd like to start with a little announcement and a reminder that this session will be recorded, and after the session in the coming weeks, we'll all have access to it as attendees. With that, welcome to the party. Let's get it started. I wanted to start with a great big thank you for those of you brave souls still here after 3 days of sessions. I know I've enjoyed and learned a lot in these sessions from many of the speakers, and we hope to have some tidbits for you too. Before I get into a little bit of background about myself, I'd like to start, and Estelle does her introduction, we'd like to share first a little bit about 3 goals that we have for our talk today. And the first one is to drive some awareness of the acceleration of sustainability, what's happening in the financial markets and how that's driving responsibility efforts in companies. We'd also like to demonstrate the opportunity on how chief data officers and their staff can use this mandate, if you will, for sustainability to actually drive innovation, so to move from obstacle to innovation. And finally, 5 actionable tips to take to improve your data and analytic maturity as it relates to ESG. As for me, my name is Penny Wand. I'm a partner at West Monroe. I focus on the data engineering and analytics practice. I grew up in technology. I started my career in electrical engineering. That was my degree. Spent a good 12 years in telecom and a variety of industries, and actually a variety of roles. Telecom, property and casualty insurance, consumer electronics, and then the latter half of my career in consulting. And you might think, wow, that's, how do you go from here to there? But the common thread in my career has been, I found early on that I love the space in between tech and business. I love talking to architects, solution architects, geeky people, and really translating that to how does it apply to business? And that has been the thread throughout my career, whether I was managing very large programs, business unit CIO type roles, or, and on into professional services, and a stint in sales operations too, so had a wide variety of roles. Really excited to speak with you today and share some of the things that we've been learning along the way. Estelle?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Estelle Mangeney. I'm a director at West Monroe. My focus really is I work with utility companies, so both gas and electric. My primary focus is working with utilities on their decarbonization strategies, plans, and supporting implementation of grid modernization initiatives. So, when I was asked to come here and present here with Penny, I started asking myself, well, what's my role? Like, how do I contribute to ESG? What am I doing? And one part of the easy answer is I'm working in energy and utilities. I'm helping utilities modernize the grid, decarbonize their assets. But thinking through a little bit more, we really are trying to enable utilities with their ESG efforts, but also for everyone here. And really, when we work with utilities on their decarbonization plans, initiatives, we always consider GSG emissions, but we also think about disadvantaged communities, EG communities, creating new training workforce programs, helping them upskills to meet the requirements of the future, and also creating new jobs. So I like to think, or I came to the conclusion that really we're an enabler of ESG, focused more on the E part, but still doing a lot of contribution toward that area. So very excited to be here and talking to you about ESG. So we're going to go through sustainability and how it is an outcome of ESG. Why ESG has become so important and a critical data point for investors today. The current state of ESG and opportunities we see in the market, and most importantly, those 5 actions that we think no matter where you are on your ESG journey, you should consider. And we're hoping to have 10, 15 minutes towards the end to ask questions. All right, so let's dive in. Sustainability. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, to pursue sustainability is to create and maintain the condition under which humans and nature can exist in productive harmony to support present and future generations. So really, sustainability is a concept of doing no harm to our environment, our society, for our current and next generations. And there's three components that drive sustainability, and sustainability is really an outcome of those three categories. There's the environmental side of the equation, which is really having clean air, clean water, food, and energy. The society side, which is, the way I think of it, is really an equitable marketplace. And the governance is almost an enabler. It's having the processes, the system, the tools in place to obtain and sustain these goals. And the main challenge today is really to build confidence in ESG data so we can establish effective baselines, measure progress, and ensure stakeholder buy-in.
Thanks, Estelle. Some of you may have taken the audience poll. We put it out early, so it's been up and we have a few results. And I'm going to talk a little about these questions, why we asked them, and what we heard from you, which we think is pretty representative of the broader audience. So we asked, where are you on your ESG journey from a data perspective? And the way we put the questions was really from an organizational perspective versus, say, a technical or any other. And that was because usually the organizational roles, et cetera, will tell us how committed a company really is and how far along on their journey. So that's how we structured these questions. And so the first was no sustainability lead, whether a chief sustainability officer or someone in charge of sustainability. And for our audience poll, that was 28%. So 28% have not officially started their sustainability journey. We can somewhat assume from that. Second was, okay, there's somebody appointed, but the relationship with the chief data officer limited to non-existent. 24% fell in this category. Established partnership between the sustainability lead and CDO was 20%. A formal cross-functional steering committee, that was 12%. And I was a bit surprised, I'll say, by the final. So if you were following the math, which might have been tricky, 16% are left, and those were the folks that not only have a steering committee, but an actual roadmap to address specifically the data and analytic needs. So we wanted to do this survey to get a sense of who our audience is, where are folks at the conference in their awareness of some of these issues. So next, Estelle is going to talk a bit about what are the trends that have been driving, over the last 20 years, driving sustainability. And I think what you'll find comes really clear is the acceleration in the last 2 to 3 years even.
Thank you. So sustainability is a term that was introduced in the early 90s. In '87, the UN published Our Common Future, which is also commonly known as the Brundtland Report. And the goal of the report was to encourage countries to work together on sustainable development. So first, ESG, which is still today, but is very much focused on climate change, environment, not as much as it is today on the financial side. New standards, companies are being created. All the objectives are to help research, measure, track, communicate, and help countries, cities, companies communicate and understand their environmental impact. It's only in the early 2000s that we start thinking about or discussing responsible investments. 2015, we have the UN, the 17 sustainable goals that the UN published, and the goal was to achieve a better, more sustainable future for all. Then we have the task force on climate-related financial disclosures that are being created. We have CEOs, like BlackRock CEOs, encouraging everyone and other CEOs, other companies, to really look at financial performance and societal contributions. And this is where we start seeing ESG coming from being a climate disclosure to financial disclosure. 2019, we see tremendous, this is the start of tremendous acceleration in financial reporting, ESG becoming really key for investors. Companies are voluntarily reporting their ESG data, their sustainability efforts. The market is asking for it. Your consumers are asking for it. Investors are looking into ESG. They're looking to clean up their own portfolios. They're looking at ESG as a data point in terms of risk assessments, and it is starting to impact availability to capital. We have companies across the board that are trying to access environmental, societal, governmental debt markets, and this is through these sustainability-linked bonds. So those bonds, those sustainability-linked bonds, are linked to the issuer's performance sustainability. So you have companies like Total Energies, which is an oil and gas company from France, formerly known as Total, announced that all of its new bond would be tied to climate key performance indicators. That means that if Total Energies is not performing against those measurable targets, the investors get impacted. And those targets are typically Scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are direct and indirect emissions controlled by the company. PwC announced in early 2021 that they would create 100,000 new positions to push for ESG. We anticipate ESG assets globally to surpass $41 trillion in 2022. And now we have the SEC, as everybody knows, proposing a rule to mandate ESG disclosures. So all these trends are driving the need for defensible and actionable data. And this is really why we're here today, to talk about how to capture ESG data, how to measure it, why is it important, and what you need to have in place. Now I'm going to turn it to Penny to talk about the market and then some opportunities that we see.
I think it's pretty important to look at the money aspect of things, kind of the old follow the money, like in the crime drama, to understand what's happening in the picture and where the drive is coming from. It was pretty astounding to read that capital debt and the green and sustainability bonds, which I'll talk about more in a little bit, has increased tenfold in the last 5 years. So incredible amounts of money coming. So what happens after all this money flows in? Now we're starting to read a lot of articles about claims of greenwashing, purporting societal benefits and environmental benefits that you can't back up. Now we're seeing increasing legislation as a result, right, and auditor interest, et cetera. So it reminds me a bit of Sarbanes-Oxley, and many of you were around for that. We spent a lot of time, the accounting firms did, documenting process controls, et cetera. So in some respects, it's like Sarbanes-Oxley. But in other respects, in our view, not at all. Because with this, we believe there's a great opportunity to harness data, and it's not just the world of the auditors. There are all kinds of new data sources, new business processes, et cetera. So this is not about necessarily audit controls. Yes, that's a part, and so we need to have industrial grade, industrial strength data. So that's what we're here to talk about. And especially exciting, we believe that going forward, companies will make decisions not just on financial, but environmental factors, and they will be almost equal. And you're starting to see this trend already with all the statistics, some of which we will share today. So, like I just mentioned, this means defensible, actionable data. And we all know how challenging this is with our operational data today. And now we have all new data sources and third-party data to think about. I think I just went by my slide. So in this next slide, I'll talk a little bit about where we see companies today and how we see the evolution of ESG as it relates to sustainability, as it relates to data and analytics. So first, it really doesn't matter, and of course we're going to stay out of the political domain today, but it doesn't matter whose budget passes, et cetera. What's really interesting is that CEOs agree, this was a Gartner study last year, that ESG is an investment that attracts not only customers, but investors and talent. The majority of people are very interested in this topic. It doesn't matter what stakeholder they are to the firm. Interestingly also, Marsh McLennan did a study either last year or early this year that showed, the title of it was something like ESG as a workforce strategy, and it showed a 14-point increase in engagement, employee engagement for those companies that demonstrate a commitment to sustainability. So those are real numbers that speak for themselves. Many of us here probably know what it costs to attract folks, especially in this day and age. So if this is great motivation to think of sustainability not just as a must do, but move it to a want to do, and how can I do it better? You'll notice as I go through this curve, there's quite a bit of similarity to the curves we've all seen, right, that go from descriptive to predictive and prescriptive automation. We see the same thing here. So first, companies start with compliance, often siloed. We've been talking to a major household consumer brand that everyone knows, and it's fascinating. While they have a very, very large sustainability team, they're still quite immature in how to measure. They don't have their measurements fully defined. They don't have a relationship currently with the chief analytic officer. So this is an example of where many companies are. They know it's important, they are doing things, but not necessarily capturing the data in concert and using this as an opportunity to mature data and analytic capability. Operationalizing would be the next step. So this is moving beyond the rear view mirror and what did I do and reporting it because I have to saying, okay, now that I know this, where can I go from here? Where can I begin to automate? Couple examples of things that might be happening here, and this also supports the need to bring your sustainability data as you're doing these projects. Think about data first, as your firm is, and because you're ultimately going to want to marry up your current operational data and metrics, both financial and operational process metrics and cost metrics, with your new sustainability data. One example is there are new standards evolving in the gas industry for certified national gas. To be able to reduce emissions in the supply chain from the production of gas all the way through the distribution. And in order to do that, you'll need to set a baseline. You'll need to understand what are my current emissions for my process, and therefore what is it in the future. The next level of maturity, optimization, and this is where analytics can begin to play a role. One example of that might be using ML, machine learning, and algorithms to understand and improve your raw materials, process efficiency, waste in your manufacturing process. Another really interesting one here, I don't know how many of you have heard of something called a sustainability-linked bond, but sustainability-linked bond is a bond that's issued, and the company issuing the bond commits to performance objectives. So unlike a green bond where you promise to do great things for the environment with the money you get, a sustainability-linked bond is tied to performance measures. And your cost of capital will be impacted by your ability to meet the measures. So what does this mean for data and analytics? It means if your company is doing this, then you really have to have confident data, because wherever there's finance, there are auditors. Wherever there's auditors, there are a lot of questions, and we need that, again, defensible data. As an example, in the US here, this was more popular in Europe. It's coming to the United States more now. Schneider Electric recently issued a sustainability-linked bond for 650 million euro, and with it, they plan to avoid 800 megatons of CO2 in the atmosphere by 2025, increase their diversity. One of the key measures there that I appreciated was 30% of women in leadership teams, and their third one was to train 1 million underprivileged people. So they're hitting on both the environmental and the societal impacts of sustainability. That's just one example, but there are billions and now trillions flowing into this. And then finally, innovation, new products. Pretty cool, all the things that are going on out there if you have not seen. Couple examples of technology. Solar panels out on water and lakes and reservoirs. One of the challenges with solar panels is how much energy or how much land space they take up. Put it on the water, much more efficiency, especially because of the cooling impact of the water. In single-use plastics, there are companies out there that are coming up with plastic films that are made of, one was silk proteins, and they were even edible, which I found pretty interesting, and or plastics made with wood byproducts. So very interesting innovations that are coming around right from startups often, but they will impact the large companies. So I think innovation opportunities in this space are boundless, whether we're talking physical products, supply chain, software products, or data and analytic products. So companies that establish a disciplined approach and think of this as an enterprise opportunity and an opportunity to mature these data and analytic capabilities are going to benefit. Those who don't will suffer. So what can we do about this? Next, I'll talk about 5 actions that you can take now with your teams. First, again, as I've said, this isn't just a mandate or a must-do, but there's tremendous opportunity here to innovate, and we're seeing it with quite a few companies. The first thing is cross-functional team. We know this. We're experienced people. We have seen this in many of the talks today or this week. People talked about the challenge of multidisciplinary team and cross-functional. I think the unique perspective in the sustainability space is that cross-functional will probably need to extend into your supply chain and external partnerships. Second, a specific data and analytic roadmap that is tied to your strategy, tied to your sustainability strategy, and which should be tied tightly to your business strategy or a part of your business strategy. You heard me say investment grade data. All this auditing and because of all the money that has flown into the capital markets, there will be need to defend the claims. So we're moving from marketing to mandate, right? And from obstacle to opportunity, but the key is data governance. Agile exploratory approach. All of these new measures, these standards are evolving, and because they're evolving, companies will have to really understand what they're putting out in the market. And so using an agile approach is the best way to get quick results, validate, understand your governance issues, and build cross-functional support. And then finally, an enterprise digital and data architecture that can bring in data at the pace by which you need to make decisions. So let's step through each of these 5. So the first one is cross-functional team. So first, we saw from our survey, there are a lot of companies out there, the majority yet, that haven't established this relationship between the chief data officer or the chief data and analytics officer and sustainability. In fact, some companies are still working on breaking down silos across all their traditional roles, but it's going to be even more critical for sustainability. I think the more interesting piece is supply chain representation from outside the company, especially for companies that are in, say, consumer goods or manufacturing or retail. In that case, getting visibility into the supply chain can be very challenging. A couple examples there. We do a neat thing at West Monroe called the Fisher Fellowship under our CSR objectives. And we've sent, I think, 28 Fisher Fellows out around the globe to do great things for companies. And one of the most recent that demonstrates the supply chain challenges and transparency and getting data all the way down to the source of where food is grown. One of our folks went out and worked on a software application to do, trying to capture data to show the quality of coffee and the cost. And it was really aimed at at the S and the ESG to make sure that people could earn a fair wage, the farmers could earn a fair wage doing this work. And the project was overall successful, but they had to make some adaptations because in Uganda, where we did the study and worked with the company, farmers didn't have access to technology. They didn't know how to use technology. And so there was a lot of adapting. And that's the case in many examples here. But ultimately, they did get enough data. They trained a few people, got enough managers trained that they were able to capture what the actual cost and labor cost was to help these farmers. I think I have 2 examples here. Yeah, another one, multinational client of ours. And they happen to need corn. Corn is their one of their many raw materials in their supply chain. And they were astounded as they tried to dig into this because there were so many types of corn grown in so many parts of the world, and trying to capture that data. And not only capture like where the corn was grown, how sustainable was it. Another interesting point was ultimately they're going to have to report on this locally. So you know how we said earlier that we're going to see financial, environmental metrics and factors in consideration weigh as heavily as finance. The reporting requirements are going to do the same thing. You'll have to be able to report on where that corn came from, what field it grew, and be able to report by business unit, et cetera. Very similar to how you have to report today for your businesses. So these things are good reasons to really think about your supply chain, both internally, how you do things, as well as external partnerships. MIT's Sloan Business Review had a good article in the fall about some really unique ways companies were trying to partner to improve supply chain transparency. Partner with other companies, partner potentially with competitors, because otherwise it'll be very costly to gather this data for every single supplier without driving some industry partnerships. So I expect innovation in this space. The next one, a data-focused strategy and roadmap. This goes for your standard business too, right? But the way we look at data and analytic maturity is through 4 dimensions or lenses. We have a maturity assessment that goes along with this, but the operating model, which is your strategy, your roadmap, your leadership, your processes, your platform, your platform, which is your technology, insight and value, and we have insight and value because many companies stop at the insight piece and they don't get all the way to value. And so the important thing is that you know what you're going after, you have value hypotheses, you go after them. And this is part of insight and value. And finally, arguably the most important quadrant from a sustainability perspective, because of the data lineage and the new data sources we talked about, will be data governance. And if we've been in this field for any amount of time, we know how challenging data governance is. So if you've already started on your program, this may be a good opportunity to actually accelerate it by bringing the power of the enterprise to sustainability. Staying on that roadmap for a moment. So what are the keys to have a successful roadmap if you do not have one? The first one is a straight line between the business strategy and the data strategy. They really need to be tightly coupled. The data initiatives in the roadmap really should tie back to your business objectives and your business strategic pillars. This one's an important one as well. Clear value hypothesis with prioritized use cases. So when we talk about analytics use cases in particular, we look at impact, of course, right? What value lever am I going after? Is it revenue? Is it efficiency? Is it, is it sustainability? Is it labor? What am I looking at? But the interesting dimension in analytics use case prioritization is around complexity. Making sure that you find a good place to start that is feasible. We talked earlier about the unavailability of data or the immaturity of data in this space or the lack of understanding of the data. When you set out on a roadmap, pick a problem that you feel confident you can solve and it's worth solving, and secondarily, that when you solve that, you can move on to the next one and grow so that you can continually build momentum for it. Another benefit of this exercise from a strategic perspective is continuing to break down those darn cross-functional silos. When you do this exercise, it should be done against the business. There are a few different ways to do it, business process or business strategic pillars, but then bring in your cross-functional team. And then the third is address these 4 components of maturity. Build it, and they will come is not a thing. It's never been a thing for as long as I've been delivering technology solutions to create business value in industry or in consulting. But it's really critical to get all the way, really define where you need to be in each quadrant. That doesn't mean you have to be perfect in all quadrants or that you have to do it all at once. What we tend to see is that companies, depending on their size, of course, build a data platform, thinking technology is and it will help, right? Then they maybe get some data scientists, do a few experiments, but if firms haven't begun tackling data governance and the operating model and building the leadership muscle and the data culture, it's very difficult to create sustained value. So that's why the roadmap should address all of these, not necessarily all at once, and it doesn't mean, of course, you need to be a 5 out of 5 on everything either, depending on your business goals. So the next key in action is create investment-grade data. So what are we seeing? You heard Estelle talk about the evolving standards, right? They've been evolving for the last 20 years. They're still out there, more standards, more mandates, but there's not a lot of consistency still. And so how do you respond to that? Well, one way, get your data governance foundation in place. What I mean by that is start preparing and building that muscle, understanding who owns what data sources, who are the stewards of the data, building your teams, leveraging what you've already done, again, hopefully, in your company, you're somewhere along your data governance journey. New data sources, wow, we heard a lot about that this week, didn't we? I know in one of the panels, there are entire new products building up about how to manage your third-party data sources, how to verify that third-party data and where it comes from. That's going to be more and more important. And so that drives the need to have a data catalog so people know what's out there and available. It drives the need to have data curation. Somebody should be managing that. I know too many stories of our clients who aren't controlling this third-party data today. They're paying for it in multiple departments. People don't know what's really available, not controls on whether they should even be using this data. So innovation is already happening and has been in that space on the tooling front. But data catalog is also critical for data fluency. Increased audits, we've talked a lot about that. So this is your master data management and data lineage. So you can tell where did that data come from, what happened to it along the way, and you can defend it. Sustainability-linked bonds. So we talked about that earlier. These are the bonds that you're committing as a firm when you issue this bond to a performance objective. That performance objective has to be measured and defended. These sustainability-linked bonds have been in the news too, so all this money is flowing in, but now some of the watchdog agencies are calling for more clarity around the performance objectives and and I'm not a finance person, but on the performance side, more specificity around how these need to work. So that's your data quality management. I know if it was me and I was going to set a performance objective, I'd want to run some analytics and some alternatives to know what are my chances of making this, because I'm going to have a lot of pressure to do so. Great opportunity for the chief, the CDO and the CFO to have a great conversation and build a plan around this. And this was another area we've been talking to one of our multinational clients about, are they ready? What would it take to get ready to be able to undertake this type of financing vehicle? And then finally, integrations with trading partners. Integrations and third-party, similar issue. So bottom line, this is why I've shared why I think data governance is probably the most critical of the dimensions as it relates to sustainability. Finally, number 4, an iterative approach to determining metrics. So what this is about, as we said, new data sources that people don't understand, people don't even understand their current data sources. So this is the best way that we have found to test new metrics and to build cross-functional muscle within your organization. And we use recommend an iterative approach. Wow, that's tough to say Thursday afternoon. Identify what you think your new KPIs need to be with your cross-functional team. Determine what data sources you think you need and gather some sample data. Bring it in, cleanse it, and this can be done in Tableau, Power BI. You can ingest Excel. It isn't a long formal requirements gathering. The goal here is to get the data ingested and start looking at it as a team as soon as possible, days typically. And over a period of a few weeks, you really can learn a lot. And out of it comes better understanding cross-functionally, you get your data visualizations, you start to understand how to organize this data, the important aspects around data security, and how to manage the data. We did something like this for CDW actually, and for their HR department, where they had trouble, they didn't have all their HR data in their warehouse for whatever reason, but we brought the different HR functions together, talent acquisition, talent development, talent management, and they were so thrilled. They said Christmas came early, the holidays came early when they were able to answer questions that they thought about every month and every quarter previously. And then they came out with a whole list of things that they knew they needed to define so they could stop having this argument, and then they could ultimately automate the workflow. This approach will be helpful too to adapt to evolving standards. Test things out, get them working, get the buy-in, get the understanding, then worry about how you automate it. So that's kind of the bottom line here is use an agile approach for metrics. The old picture is 1,000 words, worth 1,000 words adage applies here. And then the final is leverage your enterprise digital and data architecture. So earlier, we talked about the importance of merging your operational data and your ESG data. Because if that ESG data stays in the silos, like it is in many companies, it will be very difficult to move to truly get to innovation, because you'll have narrow data over a certain subset of the business, like the supply chain, without being able to marry that up, say, with financial data or operations data to drive improvements. So that ESG data and the operational data should be going into your data platform, and we could argue about whether that's going to be a data mesh or a data warehouse. That's not the topic of our conversation here today. But the idea is to start building that muscle, start somewhere, get this going so that ultimately, and also then you can leverage master data management tools if you have them, or it may be an opportunity to help you get these master data management tools, because one thing's for sure, you're going to need master data management and data cataloging for these new sources. So I would say hopefully that sustainability team doesn't get too far out ahead, because it's painful when metrics change. It was on spreadsheets. How do you defend the history you had, what you've been reporting, how you impacted your trends? And finally, then, with a proper digital and data architecture, you can integrate with whomever you need. You can serve up reporting, you can serve up analytics, and you're really ready. You're ready for that to drive innovation. Not easy, for sure. But those are the 5 tips to move from compliance to actually being able to innovate. So what we're saying, the time is now. Seems like the market's saying the time is now. Seems like investors, customers, and our employees are telling us this, per the study we talked about earlier. So forge those partnerships, think creatively. Read that MIT Sloan article. There were some good ideas in there for supply chain. Try to get out of the silo. The sustainability team, make best friends with the sustainability lead. And meet strategic business objectives, not just mandates. And we think that this is the way to go. This is the way you can go about it, and what that might look like step by step. And of course, West Monroe would love to help. If you don't know us or haven't worked with us before, we're about a 2,000 person company, and our real differentiator that I love, and it's the reason I joined the firm, was I felt like a kid in a candy shop, because we have folks with functional expertise, deep industry expertise in the industries we operate, as well as our technical expertise to bring to clients. And we found that we believe it pays off, and our clients absolutely agree. So thank you, and with that, we'll take some questions. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Oh, no worries. They prepared us. We're all good. Okay.
Yes. Hi, thank you
Hi.
both. I agree the time is now. In the Wall Street Journal this morning, Dieter Holger just reported that investors are in droves voting against boards who are not following ESG or are not prioritizing ESG topics. Very interesting, but it's unbalanced. Europe is doing this much more than
Yes.
the United States. But that's not really what I want to ask you about. I want to ask you about reporting standards. So I get asked a lot about supply chain sustainability, supply chain ESG, how green is my supply chain is the question over and over again. The problem is, how do you benchmark? How can companies benchmark against their competitors when there's standardization, it just doesn't exist for the reporting?
So I am not a standards expert, but I'll take a shot at that because you're right, the standards don't exist. And there's a lot of great articles and news, you've probably read the same things about the ESG data providers. None of their data matches up because there aren't standards. There's a big call for it. But I would say the way to defend that is kind of like own your own story, right? And understand where you are and where you need to go and try to measure and set your own definition. And if you do it with discipline, right, you can defend it. They might not agree, but you can define what you did, and then when the standards do evolve, then you have something you can map to neatly, or I mean, it'll still be work, but neatly. That would be my answer because they are evolving. Everything we read and more to come, and these audits are going to drive, I believe, the audits that are going on now and the accusals that you've seen in the news are going to certainly drive an acceleration there.
As a follow-up, do you have any inkling or any idea of who might or what organization might drive standardization?
I don't think it's going to be anyone. And I mean, there are some organizations, SASB, et cetera, standards seem to be pretty firm, and the SEC's order that's proposed ruling, right, is out there for, if you don't know, the SEC has a proposed rule out there that public companies will need to report greenhouse gas scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, which are the emissions that are direct and indirect, right? Scope 3 will phase in. And they give advice on which standards bodies, that they trust. And the greenhouse gas protocol as it relates to emissions specifically has been around for a long time, so fairly standard. You're welcome.
Great. We have a couple of questions from the virtual audience, so I can throw one out. Of the 5 steps, which is the most challenging in your experience?
In the 5 steps, let's think about this. I think the people parts are always the hardest part, establishing the proper cross-functional team sponsorship, right? Because folks are so busy these days, and they're often very, very in tune with the issues in the business unit or the department or the function that they represent, and trying to build true understanding and consensus in short snippets of time together, that can be quite challenging. So I would say that is one of the most challenging. For sustainability, though, I think the third-party data governance will not be easy. There aren't standards for taxonomy for many of these things. We're just at the very beginning. So in the specific to sustainability, I think that data availability and data governance will be challenging. Yes?
Go to the microphone. No, go ahead. Just take the microphone, please.
It's a question that directly relates basically to the challenges for data governance, because you had a good motivation, and I also appreciated very much your systematic approach that actually goes a little beyond some of the other presentations that we have been seeing here on ESG.
Thank you.
But the question is, do we have already the responsibilities or the data stewards for the new data in place? So what changes do you foresee also for data governance roles? And on the other hand, you were relatively broad around the data per se. So how do we deal with all the data that comes from outside the company? So I have been working with a company that actually has a lot of production in China, where they're producing clothes, so fashion company, and they don't have any oversight basically on part of the data they actually could get. So how do you see these global supply chains eventually, challenges to be tackled?
That's a big question. Thank you, and thank you. I think that the first part of the question was, how do you see data governance changing and the roles? right now I see additional stewards, but I think it's an intentional discussion to define what are my new data domains, right, that do not exist. So I would recommend you start with understanding what the data domains are, and any implications of this new data to domains that exist. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to have new domains. As for, some of these industries like, clothing, where you're, especially when you're looking at supply chains all the way down to raw material, I think it's going to take time. It's going to be step by step. And to me, it goes back to prioritize something important and make some progress. It sounds trite, but I think we can get paralyzed by deciding, right? But if we use the framework of what is my business strategy, what do I need to accomplish, what's most important, and then what can I actually do, and marry those two things up, would be how I would start.
But that's also one thing we were discussing this afternoon is, I think in terms of partnership, there might be looking internally, managing your data internally, and then looking at your partners. Some may not even have the capabilities, right? Especially if we're looking at very remote
coffee growers in Uganda.
Exactly. So it may need to be innovating in the renewing partnerships, having different partnerships, or completely new system or new industries to enable them to get access to that data and being able to share it with you.
That's where I think that the innovation possibilities are so interesting, and why I like the Sloan Business Review article. Companies were attempting to have one audit done and get visibility from it. Or in the supply chain, another example, on a factory floor in some remote country, they didn't have access, right, to technology to report concerns, et cetera. So they just took phone calls and then, suggested marry up the phone calls and the reports with the data you have from the audit with what they're reporting from operations. So that's where I think there will be a lot of innovation too, is how are we going to address the supply chain visibility? The supplier won't want to build it thousands of times for every customer either. So yeah, lots of opportunity.
I have another question from the virtual audience. How do you see data and analytic capability relative to ESG evolving over the next 5 years?
So in the next 5 years, I think, our survey today showed 28% of the people that responded don't have a sustainability lead. I think almost every company will have a sustainability lead in the next 5 years. I think we'll continue to see tons of innovation in the data space as well as in the product and software space, and new ideas around governance, because they're going to need to start to figure out how to tackle some of these problems. And I think a lot of inspiration will be driven by startups and new companies who inspire larger companies.
I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Can you go to the microphone, please? That's for our virtual audience to hear.
Yes.
Just one thing to add to that on the evolution. I mean, one thing that we're projecting also is that as organizations start to get the foundation in place, one of the topics that we've been hearing here is then the monetization of that. So not only once you've got the programs in place to improve your own compliance and the compliance of your supply chain, now that you've got all of this information, can you begin to monetize that? But that's something that I think is 5 to 10 years down the road.
I also think, if I can just add, this is me speaking now, my own question, but I think the ESG mandate for organizations that really hits home with the shareholders, with the board of directors, and with the C-suite is something that the CDO and the Strategic Data Management Analytics program leaders really need to seize the moment for, because we've been sort of anecdotally relevant to the business, and there's been a struggle to push that rope, like pushing the rope up the hill to get the C-suite to understand behavioral changes necessary, investment strategies required, to lay down all the things you laid out on the data governance, data management track. We've been talking about all those things, but ESG failure, is synonymous with business vulnerability, right?
Yes.
Shareholder value erosion. And I think that's got their attention. And I think this is a window of opportunity, a moment in time to really cement the importance of the strategic capability relevance of data management and analytics to the firm's long-term viability, and we need to seize it.
100%. And I think one of the keys with that is, and last year I attended this conference virtually, and one of the top topics was data fluency. And that data fluency has to start at the executive level.
Exactly.
And many companies, and it depends again on industry and size, their data savviness, let's say, but I think CDOs who are in a laggard industry as it relates to data, a non-digital native, would do well to establish a data literacy program, at least for their executives. One of the, it was PepsiCo. Mark from PepsiCo talked about this, how they did a couple-hour session for all their, cross-functionally for the executives, so they could understand it's not just the data, but what it means to have data. How do you value that asset? How do you take care of it? There's still a lot of maturity that needs to go on at all levels, but I would argue starting top down to get the switch, permanently turned on, let's say.
Well, and would you agree? I mean, I think that this ESG reporting, as it becomes mainstream and it influences investor behavior and preference, I think it's going to become as significantly relevant, the accuracy and integrity of that data reported, as the 10K and the 10Q is from the CFO's desk. The financial statement reporting that will make or break, the valuation of an organization. I worked for Veritas Software back in the early 2000s when we got hit with this financial statement restatement because of the income classification, and our stock plummeted almost 50% overnight when we restated the financial statements back 5 years. And so this had a profound impact. We ended up being acquired opportunistically by Symantec. This was very C-suite and board of director relevant, and I think when the ESG metrics begin to be a requirement for how the street sees you, capital market sees and values you, then I think, again, we're going to throw a big, huge spotlight and be looking for people to point the finger at for the blame in terms of the integrity of the data and reporting, and that falls squarely on the shoulders of the CDO and that team. So I think we've got to figure out how to engage that conversation now and be ahead of that game.
Yeah, it's not just the partnership between the CDO and the sustainability, it's the CDO and the CFO, like we were sharing earlier, and one of our humongous clients was talking about this very thing. The reporting will be very detailed and need to be sliced and diced similar to financial reporting. So they start to come on equal footing, not in 5 years probably, but we're on a path.
Yeah, we're on a path, yeah. Other questions?
Yeah, hi. I have a question relating to data sources and the reporting. So I kind of classified between financial or regulatory data and then streaming data in the sense of satellites and environmental satellite. But I'm not clear, what are those data sources? So you said there's new data sources coming. If you could expand on that, like what is it exactly that needs to be collected to report on?
So investors use it. Right now, I would say more investors than anyone else are using a lot of these facts data sets. So as an example, I'm not going to get the number exactly right, but FactSet is an organization that has like 60 different external data feeds to help support financial analysis related specifically to ESG. So that's one example. And it was interesting, the panel, I didn't catch the whole panel, but the panel yesterday that Doug Laney moderated was talking about third-party data verification and third-party sources, and they were talking about how many sources that are out there that people don't even know. So like the platform capability is kind of hoping the industry will catch up and really trying to sort out what data sources are important. But when I'm talking about that eventually, it's going to also include supply chain transparency. I think that's where the innovation part, there's a lot of room. Will it be a data exchange? Right, where suppliers put sustainability information around their product versus what you have in an exchange today to support your ERP, for example. So hope that answers a bit. But yeah, if you've not checked it out, I've been surprised myself how many external data sets I've been finding in different places, different marketplaces developing.
Hey, just to follow up to that.
Yeah.
So for example, IoT data, right, for supply chain, environmental efficiencies, that your trucks take the right routes. Is that considered one of the sources that you report on? Because we deal with a lot of high streaming analytics. I'm just trying to figure out like, what are those data sources? Can they be that raw data that then you can run analytics to do analysis and then do these type of reportings, or is it specific controls it has to map to?
So I think the answer is your awesome consulting answer, it depends. Because to me, that data, the IoT data and the performance could be used for a multitude of things, right? From your sustainability metrics plus operational to drive innovation. I'm trying to think from an environmental perspective. Do you have a perspective on that from environmental, Estelle, about the IoT data, like in the energy sector? It would be if it was related to emissions, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, on the emission side, yeah, I would track the, if you're talking about trucks and transportation, then mileage, gas emissions, the type of vehicles.
That would be a good example of IoT data that would fit into emissions. So it's kind of use case dependent.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions in the room? There's one more question, I think, from the audience, the virtual audience. Make sure that I have this. Oh, are the 5 steps in order? Do you have to do them all at once?
I talked a little bit to that earlier. When we talk about building a roadmap and to improve data and analytic maturity, no, they don't have to be in order. And there's kind of a natural evolution. And the order and the intensity, I'll say, or the rating you're trying to get really depends on your sector and what kind of scrutiny you're under or what kind of opportunity you have. So they don't need to be done in order. They don't need to be done all at once. And that's the trick in determining the right roadmap and where to put your money, when.
All right, if there aren't any more questions in the room, I think we're at the end. There are no more online.
Great.
Great presentation again. Round of applause for the...
Thank you.